Joining us now, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, senior senator, ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, thank you for joining us today on the John Fredericks Radio Network, sir.
John, thanks for having me, and it's always fun, and I'm glad you're still the Godzilla of truth.
Well, thank you, Senator. You know, I always respect and greatly appreciate your candor. We don't always agree on everything, but I really appreciate and respect your straightforwardness. And in the spirit of complete disclosure, I want to tell our listeners I publicly endorsed your reelection campaign in 2014. I voted for you also, and I look forward to seeing you at the 2019 Democratic Party of Virginia Gala on June 15th. We'll be there live, and I'm sure you'll come on my show live as you always do with your lovely wife. So we're looking forward to that. Senator, as the ranking member of Senate Intel, you have access to classified information most of your colleagues don't have, can't ever see. You spent months going on Sunday TV talk shows and doing other interviews, saying that you had information that led you to speculate there was evidence of collusion between the Russian Federation and President Trump. You said 100 times, I have more questions than answers. But after 2 years of investigations, Senator, $35 million, Special Counsel Robert Mueller found no evidence of collusion. Some people say, and I ask the question, are you obsessed with Russian collusion? And when are you going to just publicly acknowledge it didn't exist?
John, I'm obsessed about a foreign country using 21st century tools, attacking the United States and our democracy in 2016. I'm pretty obsessed also about the fact that the Mueller investigation, 37 indictments, 8 guilty pleas, still waiting on people what's going to happen with Roger Stone. I don't know about you, but I think the fact that there were over 140 contacts between Russians and folks affiliated with the Trump campaign, that the Trump campaign manager turned over campaign documents to a known Russian spy, that we still don't know in terms of the extent of Roger Stone's connections, ties to WikiLeaks, which was acting as a Russian agent. Now, I will accept Mueller's conclusion that they didn't reach the level of conspiracy, since collusion, as we all know now, is not even a legal term. But what I'm focused on right now is how do we prevent this from happening again in the future? Because Christopher Wray, the FBI director, said just 2 weeks ago they'll be back. So let me briefly do 3 things that I think we ought to do on a going forward basis. Number one, if all those things that happened in 2016 didn't violate the law, I'll accept Mueller's conclusion. But I think what we ought to have, if a foreign government tries to intervene in the next presidential election, or whomever, let's face it, the Russians don't have a favorite in terms of party. Right. There ought to be an affirmative obligation to tell the FBI. So at least law enforcement is aware of an attempt to meddle. Number 2, we ought to make sure we pass bipartisan, and my partner on this is very conservative Senator James Lankford, election security reform, so that if somebody does hack in, as it was more and more evidence is coming out in terms of specific states that I couldn't talk about in the past, that there's a paper trail after the fact. So even if a voting machine is hacked in, there's an ability to audit to make sure Americans have faith in our election system. And third, and we've talked about this on your show a number of times, I think there's got to be some rules of the road for the social media companies, because the ability of foreigners or others to manipulate, create fake personas, and candidly drive a lot of the news oftentimes that splits us as Americans because it's in a foreign country's best interest. I think we need to have rules of the road on that. I'll say what I've said to you before. If you look at what Russia did in 2016 in America, what they did in the Brexit vote, and what they did in the French presidential elections, add that all up, it's less than the cost of one new F-35 airplane. Russians and others are going to do this because it's cheap and effective, and I want to prevent it from happening in the future.
Right, but what does that have to do with Trump and collusion or conspiracy? I mean, I'm just looking for an acknowledgement that, I mean, you had a lot of people on your side telling us every day in the news, month after month after month, that he was a Russian asset or like he was a Russian agent. I mean, we had to deal with this, Senator,
John,
for 2 years.
No, John, I didn't say it. What I said is, I think it's, and we still got some work to do. I think was more than a little bit particular, or more than a little bit coincidence that you had this many outreaches from Russians, that there was clearly offering of dirt, there was clearly interest in receiving that. But I'm not here to relitigate 2016. I'm here to say, how do we make sure when we've been warned by the FBI that this doesn't happen again in the future? And John, doesn't it bother you a little bit? I would never question your patriotism. I think we all want to make sure we protect our country, but it does bother me, John, when Mr. Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, Ms. Nielsen, wanted to have a cabinet meeting about protecting our elections in 2020. She was told not to have that because it might upset, I guess, the sensibilities of the president. That, to me, is not making our nation safer.
Well, look, I agree with you. There's all the evidence is there. There's no question that with a little bit of money, I think you said the total cost of one F-16, the Russians have meddled in a bunch of elections, ours,
right.
United Kingdom's, France's, and there's got to be a way that we can prevent this in the future. But I really think that's a separate issue. But I agree with you on that. But as far as this president conspiring, I mean, that whole thing was ridiculous from the beginning. And a lot of us are bothered by what is potentially now the fake dossier given to the FISA judge. Was he or she aware, the secret judge, that a lot of this information came from Oppo research paid for by First W. Wasserman Schultz, or not, actually first the Beacon?
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what I find is curious, and if there's going to be some investigation about the origins of the FISA efforts, I can't obviously talk about that, but it's very curious that if you look at the Senate Intelligence Committee, which has got very, very conservative members on it, they are not the ones who are saying, oh, let's go into the origins of all this, because they've seen the data, the underlying documents, the background, and I think if that all comes out, it will prove, frankly, if the FBI hadn't opened some of these investigations, they would have been derelict in their duty. But let's go ahead, and I understand the Attorney General is going to look into that. But it would be, I would again point out, you look at the Republican members on the Senate Intel Committee; they are not the ones making all of these noises because they've seen the background.
Okay, I'll grant you that, and but it sounds like that you're in favor of William Barr's and the Inspector General's investigation.
No, I don't think it is needed, but if it answers people's questions, and the Attorney General, I've not been happy with this Attorney General. He appears to be more interested in being the president's personal lawyer than the Attorney General. But if it will clear up your questions and others, this was still, at the end of the day, what the Russians want, or any foreign enterprise, is they want to see us in disarray. And again, they've done a pretty good job. But and if you look at what I'm working on, I'm trying to make sure this doesn't happen again in the future. I'm trying to make sure we're alert and aware, for example, of some of the challenges we now face with China, where I'm going out always with a Republican senator and trying, usually Marco Rubio, and briefing business leaders, academic leaders, and others about the ongoing challenges with China. I think, today we're going to be dealing with Iran. I do worry at times, and I say this recognizing, Virginia is the home of our Navy, and we have some of the highest per capita military spending of any state in the country. And it's good for our economy, some of that defense spending. But I worry that in a nation like ours, where we're spending $716 billion on defense, that we may be spending too much on 20th century military hardware in a world whether we see Russia, China, others, where much of the conflict in the 21st century will be in the cyber domain, will be in the misinformation, disinformation domain, will be in the realm of space. And my fear is, particularly vis-a-vis China, who spends about a third of what we spend on defense, but takes that $500 billion delta and invests in next-generation technology, that we're living through right now kind of our generation Sputnik moment, with China trying to move ahead on 5G and the Huawei equipment issue, the areas around artificial intelligence. This is one area, actually, John, where I agree with the president. We've got to recognize some of the national security threats that are being posed by China in a variety of domains, and I think, candidly, we have been slow to rise to that alarm.
You're listening to the John Fredericks Radio Network. I'm your Godzilla of the Truth in America. We're with senior Democrat senator from Virginia. He's the ranking member, Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner. He's up for re-election, third term, 2020 here in Virginia. He's the favorite to win that. Democrats in the state have won 15 statewide races in a row. He would go for number 16, I believe. I'm somewhere close on that. Senator, you just mentioned basically the military-industrial complex. Now we've got the neocon saber rattling going on against Iran. These are the usual warmongers. You see them every day. They never change. Some things never change. Military-industrial complex, NSA Director John Bolton, the whole bunch of them now talking about, we had Tom Cotton the other day, one of the most unbelievable statements I've ever heard from a senator, saying, all we have to do is drop 2 bombs on Iran, it's done. These are the same people who told me, Rumsfeld, that we could go into Iran and be out in 90 days. We have this new Fifth Army and the whole thing would be done. And Saddam Hussein would be gone and the world would be peaches and cream. We're getting the same thing now again with Iran. How do you stand on it? Where do we go from here?
Well, good question. First of all, I disagreed with the administration's decision to get out of the Iranian nuclear deal, even though that deal had flaws. I disagreed with the designation of the Iranian Iranian Revolutionary Guard terrorism designation not because they are bad guys and bad actors, but I was afraid that we might have this kind of reaction where the tension level has ramped up dramatically. I am very, and again, as a Gang of 8 member, I've been briefed, but I've been really been on the administration very hard to say, you need to come up here and show other members of Congress in both parties at least the recent evidence of the uptick in Iranian activity, because that uptick is real for the very point you just made, John. God forbid if there was an incident that would require us to then react. I don't want half of America, or more than half of America, because candidly, there would be people in both the Democratic and Republican Party that were somehow thinking this was all being fabricated out of the White House. Because if we have a moment, the country needs to rally. I don't agree with Senator Cotton that this Iran could be taken out with some short-term military action. I think it would be an extraordinarily challenging effort. We would be successful, but it would be a huge, huge challenge. And I think it is one of the reasons why the administration getting up here and briefing all the members of Congress so they can look at the evidence is extraordinarily important. I just wish it would have happened earlier.
Well, it needs to happen. As Senator, we were lied to in the second Iraq war about WMDs in Saddam Hussein's Iraq that never existed. They had never been found. They never existed. Now you go back and you look at a lot of statements that were made. A lot of people like me now are very suspect. I was opposed to that war at the outset. I was in the minority, but a lot of people now suspected this information coming out. And so, yeah, I think the senators have to get briefed, and so does Congress. And, we're still operating under a AUMF from, 2000?
Yeah, I think, this is an area where Congress needs to do its job and has to be – Congress can't be a Monday morning quarterback on all this and then, leave all this responsibility with whomever's the president and then blame that president after the fact. We have a constitutional responsibility. If we're going to go into war, it ought to be our responsibility, not left solely to the executive. But I would, and your very point about how we got into Iraq is one of the reasons why it is so, any administration has to keep Congress informed. The one thing I do believe, and I see this each and every day, the men and women who work in our intelligence community do a damn good job. They never get the kind of attention and credit that they deserve for keeping our nation safe. And one of the things that I've been happy about so far, because we've seen this president constantly critical of the intelligence community, is I think they have not politicized our nation's intelligence. I know I got a lot of grief, for example, for supporting Gina Haspel to be the CIA chief, but having that kind of steady hand and long-term professional in the job of the top at the CIA right now is critically important to make sure that Congress and others, when they brief, that they're getting briefed with the real intelligence and not politically driven intelligence.
Here's the good news. President Trump's instincts are to keep us out of these foreign entanglements. He said that. He's been consistent in that since the day he came down the escalator, so I trust his instincts on it. That's the good news. Right now, though, yesterday, out of Yemen, Houthis firing missiles at KSA. Let me just ask you something. President Trump campaigned on getting out of supporting the Saudis in this disastrous war in Yemen, which has been going on. They've spent billions of dollars, people starving, children eating leaves off trees. It's a horrific situation. Why are we still there?
John, you sounded like a... John, I agree with you on this. I gave for years, because the Saudis have been our allies in the area. It's a tough neighborhood, as we all know. But the Saudis' inability to even use our equipment in the way it was intended, with some precision, has been just awful. And I am part of what now is a pretty solid majority, at least in the Senate, of people that say we ought to be no longer financing this Saudi war, and we need the Saudis. The Saudis have the ability to bring a ceasefire to Yemen if they choose, and they have chosen not to. Clearly, the Houthis are being helped by Iran. Iran is not a good actor. They are a long-term threat to us. We have to be careful about that. But I have been, this is a case where the president's much vaunted, relationship with the Saudi leadership ought to be, if he is the deal maker, he proposes to be, force the Saudis to end this crazy war in Yemen that you've already outlined with the human cost and what it also continues to do to destabilize the region. At the same time, I think the Saudis need to bring to an end this kind of internal, almost inter-family squabble with Qatar, which also further destabilizes the Gulf region, and particularly with this president's and his family's relationship with the Saudis, I think he needs to demand and make some change in that, in how the Saudi government acts.
Oh,
and again, we voted with a pretty solid majority, Democrats and Republicans, to cut off that military aid.
Senator, on this, we agree totally. You're absolutely right. The blockade against the state of Qatar has been a complete disaster. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, has been proved now to be totally incompetent. Whether you look at the Khashoggi episode or anything he's put his hands on has been a disaster, including that ridiculous blockade against the state of Qatar, which has destabilized the Gulf region. We got the biggest base there. And so at some point, you just have to say, look, we're dealing with somebody that we just can't work with because he's incompetent. And I think we need to do that.
As the Godzilla of truth, you need to get that message to some of your friends in the White House.
I'm trying.
I agree with you, John. It's just, I think for a long time, a lot of folks, it is a dangerous neighborhood. Saudis have been, our allies in the region, but their level of incompetence, particularly in waging this war, this is not good obviously for the region, and it's not good for long-term American interests.
I mean, when school buses are blowing up and they're blowing up
Yes, sir.
markets with children running around, I mean, you just can't get more incompetent than that. And it never stops. There's no end in sight. Plus, they're losing the war. So the whole thing is absurd. And we keep going down the same path. All right, I've only got a couple more minutes. I want to get to the USMCA, U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement replacing NAFTA, NAFTA, which, as you know, Senator, I'm a protectionist, so I hated NAFTA from day one. And at the time, I think I was one of 3 Republicans in opposition to it, me, Trump, and I think Pat Buchanan at the time. That was it. USMCA, are you going to be in favor of that or not?
You know, I'm still reviewing it, and I think candidly, I don't think it is that dramatically different than where we were with NAFTA. You and I probably on this one, I was generally been more supportive around trade. Although one of the things I think we did horribly was, the benefits of trade disproportionately went to, wealthier communities, major metropolitan areas, and the communities that got hurt by trade, we did an awful job helping those communities. I think about Southside Virginia. And I think one of the missed opportunities we had when we did tax reform was to say, okay, companies, Apple, you want to repatriate all these offshore earnings, we'll give you a low rate, but you've got to reinvest some of those offshore earnings in communities that have been hit by trade to try to balance out some of the challenges that come in a trading regime. We missed that opportunity, and on USMCA, what I've not seen yet is a major push by the administration yet to make the case, and I think most of us in the Senate have frankly, if there's not that case made, this will never get out of the House in the first place. So, will the Senate even take it up? But I'm going through it at this point. The Senate, I've not had any outreach from the White House at all to try to convince me. And as you pointed out, on this one, I've been more favorable towards trade than you and others. But they got to make the case, and the case has not been made yet.
All right, hope they're going to do that. Final question: the president last week outlining a very comprehensive legislative immigration reform plan that mirrors what Canada and Australia have, ending chain migration if it were to pass, ending the lottery, the visa lottery, and going to a merit-based, skills-based system. For instance, if we have a need for pipe fitters and there are pipe fitters in Somalia or in Haiti, they go to the top of the list. And then also fixing the asylum laws, which a lot of people say are creating the crisis at the border. On the surface, any parts of that plan, Senator Warner, that you can back as an alternative to what we have now, which is really an open border situation?
I don't believe we have an open border, but we've got a completely broken system. And I do favor moving our system towards more merit-based. That's what Canada did. That's what Australia did. That's what the UK did. And it's one of the things where it's crazy right now. Well, we train some of the world's best and brightest at our schools. Somebody gets out of ODU or out of Virginia Tech, they don't have to move back to, as you said, Somalia or Egypt or Brazil. They simply have to go to Canada that will attract these high-skilled workers. What I was disappointed with the president was it feels like this was kind of a half-hearted effort. It doesn't satisfy Republican hardliners because it doesn't bring down the total number of immigrants. It doesn't satisfy any of the Democrats because he didn't even deal with the Dreamer circumstance. So, some of the valued areas are like moving towards merit, a more merit-based immigration solution. I don't think people are going to get to that point. Now, I would go back and start as a starting point what got 69 votes 5 or 6 years ago. It was the comprehensive plan that increased border security, that moved towards merit-based system, but also dealt with issues like the Dreamers and some of the folks who are undocumented here. I think what I was disappointed in, that the president didn't seem to want to go either direction. He didn't pick up all the Republicans, didn't start with any Democrats. And I'm not sure, again, this is an area where I think there's going to be more up to Congress to step up and put together a bipartisan plan. But part of that plan ought to be, as you said, moving more towards a merit-based solution to keep us competitive on a global basis.
All right, so it sounds like you're in favor of pieces of the plan. Look, everybody's going to complain about something. This is a hot issue. Obviously, from my standpoint, I would have preferred to see the total number of visas and immigrants come down. But, there's an old saying, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, Senator, and we'll end on that. Thank you for being with us. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, and I always agree. I always enjoy it back and forth. And listen, democracy is a great thing. We don't always have to agree by any means, but I think the thing that I appreciate about you is we can disagree, but do it in a civil way, and not question that both of us want what's in the best interest of our country. I mean, we may have different ideas about how to get there, but that level of mutual respect is we could use a heck of a lot more in the town where I'm working. No
doubt about it, Senator. More information on Senator Warner, you can go to warner.senate.gov, warner.senate.gov. He is up for re-election for a third term in November of 2020. He's the favorite there, obviously, based on everything that's happening. Senator, thanks for being with us. I look forward to seeing you at the dinner, the big gala, June 15th. And,
yes,
of course, the highlight of that is when I get to talk to your wife, who's so pleasant. That's the highlight.
You guys take care.
We will see you then.